They say Adolf Hitler died in a Berlin bunker in 1945. Gunshot. Cyanide. Body burned. Case closed. But what if it wasn't? In the years that followed, eyewitness reports, classified documents, and even declassified U.S. intelligence began to suggest another possibility: that Hitler didn't die in the bunker. He escaped.
Oh, sure, and Elvis is running a beach bar in Argentina, too.
It sounds like conspiracy nonsense, until you realize how many threads were never fully tied off. In this episode, we investigate the theory that Hitler survived and may have lived on for decades. The official account says that as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, Hitler retreated to his underground bunker. On April 30th, 1945, he supposedly took his own life alongside Eva Braun. Their bodies were quickly doused in petrol and set on fire in the garden outside, a last attempt to deny the Allies the satisfaction of displaying his corpse. The Soviets recovered the remains, or so they claimed. But there was no conclusive forensic evidence, no public photos, no body shown to the world.
So you're telling me the most wanted man in history died, and we just took Stalin's word for it?
Exactly. And that's where the questions begin. The cracks in the story began to show almost immediately. Soviet officials gave conflicting accounts of what they found in the bunker, and Stalin himself claimed Hitler had escaped. Western intelligence agencies took notice. The FBI, the CIA, and even British MI6 opened investigations into possible sightings of Hitler, some as far away as Argentina, Colombia, and even Antarctica.
Right, because if I were fleeing the Allies, Antarctica would be first on my list.
But the strange part? These reports weren't all coming from cranks and crackpots. Some came from diplomats, journalists, and ex-Nazis with everything to lose. That's when the theory evolved from wild speculation to maybe, just maybe, something more. If Hitler did survive, how would he have escaped? Some researchers believe there was more to the Führerbunker than we've been told, including a sealed tunnel that may have led to the surface and beyond. From there, it's theorized he reached Tempelhof Airport, where secret late-night flights were reportedly seen in the final days of the war. And if those accounts are true, it wouldn't be impossible for Hitler to have flown to a remote airstrip and then headed for the coast.
Right, and I assume he caught a conveniently scheduled Nazi Uber to South America.
Not quite, but this is where the story takes a turn. Beneath the waves. In the months after Germany's surrender, 2 Nazi submarines surfaced in Argentina, U-530 and U-977, long after the war was over. The crews gave vague, inconsistent stories about their missions, and neither submarine had a convincing explanation for the delay. Some believe they were part of a larger rat line, ferrying top Nazi officials, and possibly Hitler himself, across the Atlantic. Argentina, at the time, was sympathetic to Nazi ideology. President Juan Perón even welcomed thousands of Germans into the country after the war.
So, 2 rogue submarines show up late, and suddenly it's Mission Impossible, Führerbunker edition?
No one's saying it's proof, but it does raise the question: what else slipped through the cracks? In the years following the war, eyewitness reports began to surface. Claims of an older German man living in Argentina under an assumed identity. Some said he lived in the Bariloche region, a remote area in Patagonia with a strong German presence and suspiciously well-funded compounds. Declassified CIA documents show that even U.S. intelligence investigated these claims, including a report from 1955 that described a man matching Hitler's appearance, living among former SS officers.
Of course, because when I think low profile, I think snowy hideout full of Nazis and schnitzel.
It sounds far-fetched until you realize how many war criminals actually fled to South America. Historians estimate that over 9,000 former Nazis escaped to Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and elsewhere after the war. Only a fraction were ever tracked down, and many lived out their lives undisturbed. If Hitler had escaped, where would he have gone? Argentina wasn't just a random dot on the map, it was a welcoming haven for ex-Nazis. In regions like Bariloche and La Falda, entire communities were built by German immigrants, some of whom arrived before the war, and others right after. These weren't just towns with a few Bavarian-style houses. They were fully German-speaking enclaves, with German schools, churches, bakeries, and silence. Locals today still won't talk about what happened there. Some say they were told never to speak about certain visitors. Others just shrug, like they know something, but won't say. In the 1940s and 50s, the Argentine government under Juan Perón actively protected these migrants. Many arrived under false identities, with forged papers and quiet government approval.
So it wasn't just one or two Nazis hiding out, it was an entire post-war ghost town where nobody asked questions.
Exactly. And in that kind of environment, a man like Adolf Hitler could have disappeared almost effortlessly. Could Hitler have made it to Argentina? By U-boat? We already know that U-530 and U-977 arrived in Argentina after the war ended, weeks late, with vague explanations. But in 2006, divers made a discovery that deepened the mystery. Just off the coast of Quequén, Argentina, they found the wreck of a German submarine, buried beneath layers of sand. This wasn't one of the documented vessels. There were no records of it ever being deployed or lost. It was as if it was never meant to be found. Experts believe the wreckage was most likely a Type 9 U-boat, a long-range model designed for transatlantic missions, often used to transport high-value cargo or high-ranking personnel. Local witnesses claimed that, in the final days of the war, they saw Germans coming ashore in small boats, ferried from a larger vessel sitting just offshore. Some described uniformed men, others remembered sealed crates. But what they all agreed on was the silence. And here's where the story gets darker. Some believe that once the passengers disembarked, the submarine returned to sea and was deliberately scuttled, sunk on purpose to hide its mission. It stayed hidden for over 60 years. If Hitler had escaped Berlin and made it to the coast, this is the kind of vessel that could have taken him the rest of the way.
Okay, but what did they find on the wreck? Any evidence? Documents? Skeletons?
That's the strange part. Before the site could be fully investigated, access was reportedly restricted by the Argentine Navy, and the search quietly ended. No formal explanation, no recovery mission, and to this day, no official report has ever been released. Whatever was down there, it was left undisturbed. If Hitler had escaped Berlin and made it to the coast, this is the kind of vessel that could have taken him the rest of the way. While some Nazis disappeared into the shadows of South America, others took a different route. In the final months of the war, the United States launched Operation Paperclip, a classified mission to extract top Nazi scientists and engineers before the Soviets could. Over 1,600 former Nazis were brought to the U.S., not to stand trial, but to work for us. They helped develop military technology and even shaped NASA's early space program.
So we punished the war criminals by giving them jobs and rockets?
The Cold War logic was simple. If we don't use them, the Soviets will. But if that's how openly the Allies handled some Nazis, you have to wonder what they were willing to look the other way on. For decades, the Soviet Union claimed they had one final piece of proof that Hitler really died in the bunker. A fragment of his skull, burned, broken, and kept under lock and key in Russian archives. But in 2009, an American pathologist named Nick Bellantoni was granted access to test it. He ran DNA analysis on the bone fragment. And the result? It didn't belong to Hitler. It didn't even belong to a man.
So the skull of the most infamous dictator in history was actually some poor woman.
That's what the test revealed. A woman under 40. Definitely not Adolf Hitler. This threw everything into doubt. If the only physical remains the Soviets claimed to have weren't real, then what exactly happened in that bunker? And how much of the official story was based on assumption, not evidence? So, did Adolf Hitler really die in that Berlin bunker in 1945? Or did he escape through the cracks, aided by loyalists, protected by sympathizers, and buried beneath decades of silence? The official story says he died by suicide and was burned beyond recognition. But there was no confirmed body, no public forensic evidence, and even Stalin wasn't convinced. Declassified intelligence, eyewitness reports, restricted rec sites, and whole towns built to forget the past. They don't prove he escaped, but they make the question impossible to ignore. Because sometimes what we call history is just the version that survived.
So maybe the bunker was the end, or maybe it was the perfect cover.
We may never know the full truth. But one thing is clear. If Hitler did escape, he didn't do it alone. If you want to see more investigations like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with what mystery we should dig into next. This was the History Inquiry. Until next time, stay curious.